Hi everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. Happy Sunday. If you're new here and you've never seen my videos before, then this might seem a little bit out of context, but just pop onto the page and scroll down and you'll see what we're talking about. If you're a regular here or you've been here on the page, then you know how this goes. So this morning I mixed up the higher hydration beginner bread recipe, which is 700 grams of water, 200 grams of starter, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt. It makes two, good size 1,000-gram loaves of sourdough. So I got those all mixed up and I completed all of the stretching and folding except for this last one, which I'm going to do now. Hi, Susan. Nice to see you. I'm glad you're here. So what we're going to go over today is what are the essential processes and how do they fit in order, and then I'll just actually show you the process of sort of the last stretch and fold, how the dough should look. So if you've watched any of my lives before, you've mostly watched me mix or occasionally watched me bake, whether it's cold proof dough or dough that's at the end of the day. But a lot of times when I'm doing the mix on the live, I'm explaining to you what stretching and folding is and what happens to the dough, but we don't always get there because it's a 2-hour process. So today I hung out with the kids. My stepdaughter actually mixed this up. So it's got 800 grams of all-purpose flour, 200 grams of spelt, and like I said, 20 grams of salt, 700 grams of water, and 200 grams of starter, which is the level 2 hydration recipe. The beginner bread recipe that we recommend people practice with until they master the essential processes is slightly less starter and slightly less water. So it's 120 grams of starter and 680 grams of water. Susan says, I have a question. I was wondering that after a couple of days, can you crisp up a loaf if it's sitting in a bag? Yeah, if you haven't finished or cut into it, then I think you could probably just put it on a cookie tray and stick it in the oven to get it to crisp up. Or of course you can toast it, so you definitely can. So what I'm going to do is the last stretch and fold on this dough. So the essential processes are, obviously you have an active starter. Usually I can mix or feed my starter before bed, and then I get up and mix early in the morning. We take our starter and our water, we whisk them together, we dump our 1,000 grams of flour in. We can use any combination of flour. For beginners, I recommend that you stay high in the all-purpose or bread flour content and lower in the whole wheat, just because whole wheat starts to be a little more advanced because it acts differently. And so we just throw our flour and our salt in, we mix it up until it starts to gather up the water, we get it to a shaggy dough, and then we rest for 30 minutes and stretch and fold, and repeat that rest for 30 minutes and stretch and fold 4 times. What's happening during stretching and folding is we're building strength in the dough. So when you first mix your dough, it's very shaggy. It sticks to your hands. You know what I mean? If you tried to pick the dough up, it would just sort of rip as you went. And I've showed this lots of time. And like I said, if you've never been on this page before, or if you're not following YouTube, in the description of this video, I've linked sort of all of our most common tutorials. And yesterday I actually sat on YouTube and created some playlists. So there's a beginner bread playlist that sort of goes in order of what you would need to know and talks about what the essential processes are. And of course, I wrote the ebook, which is 34 pages and goes really deep into it. But essentially, what we're teaching at Sourdough for Beginners is keep it really simple, just do what you need to do. So this is my last stretch and fold. And if you look at my dough right now, it is higher hydration, so it's got some stickiness to it, but you'll notice that it's not tearing, it's holding together all in one piece. So what I'm going to do right now is split this into 2 loaves and get it into my bulk proofing containers. So I would say bulk proofing is probably the most important process in getting good bread at the end. And there's a lot of confusion out there about bulk proofing. Bulk proofing happens on the counter. It takes approximately 4 to 8 hours to complete. Usually on the counter overnight is too long. It should happen in a warm environment, so on your counter. And generally what you're looking for is for your dough to double. Now, how much you're going to let your bread rise can be affected by, like, I don't know, 1,075 different things, right? But a good rule of thumb that Tom from the Sourdough Journey taught me was this: if you're going to skip cold proofing, which we often recommend beginners do until they get all of the processes down, then let your dough double, like 100%, right? So from it double in size. If you are going to cold proof, then let your dough go to 75%. Once you start doing that in a practice fashion, then you can start adjusting that percentage. You can see if maybe 30% is right for your dough, or maybe 110% is right for your dough. But essentially what we're saying is set yourself up for bulk proofing so that you can keep an eye on it and be really aware of what's happening. So these containers, these are 8-cup containers, 1.8 liters. I don't know what they are in gallons, unfortunately, but they're basically about 2.5 times the size of your dough. And if you take your dough and put them into these containers, then your dough is sort of touching on the side, and it makes it so it kind of has to go up. So the difference between sourdough and regular bread is that when sourdough is rising, it actually spreads rather than rises. So if you're used to working with yeast bread, you're used to it kind of going like in a ball upwards, right? Whereas sourdough doesn't do that. So what we see all the time is people leave their dough in this big bowl to rise, and then they say it's been sitting there for 16 hours and it hasn't risen. And the thing is that it actually has risen. It's just that this bowl is on such a big angle, the dough has like expanded sideways rather than up, and then they end up with overproof dough, and it's super duper sticky. So bulk proofing success, the bulk proofing success video is linked in the description of this video, but I'm just going to show you how I do it. So I've just separated the dough sort of into two loaves, and I'm just going to use my scale to even them out. The containers are exactly the same. So this one is 1,055. This one's 946. So I'm just going to pull some out of here until I get them pretty close. The recipe works out to about 1,000 gram loaves. I mean, obviously, if you have a little bit of extra flour or something like that, then it's going to adjust it. But now we're at 102 and 998 here, and for me, that's close enough. So what I do is I plunk the dough into these two things, and then I do like one last final stretch and fold on them while they're in this container, just to get them nice and smooth and uniform and take those edges off. Like, so just kind of like, you can see that this dough now has lots of strength in it, right? And that's the purpose of stretching and folding. That's what we're doing. So I've just got my hands like slightly damp, not soaked. I can't stop making breads with no one to give it to, laugh out loud. I just love making them. Susan, one thing you can do is you can bake your bread to like 90 or 95%. Bring it out, let it cool properly, wrap it nice and tight in like several layers of saran wrap, put some tinfoil on top of that, pop it in a Ziploc bag, put it in the freezer. And then when you're ready, or you've got someone coming over, or if you want to give it away, you can tell people this, you can actually pull it out, let it thaw completely, and then stick it in the oven at 450 or whatever it is for I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. It's best if you have a meat thermometer, but cook it to that 100%. So that's a good way to be able to bake, presuming that you've got lots of room in your freezer. I mean, not all of us do, but if you did, then that is one option that you have if you're baking more than you can give away. And I guess nowadays in Facebook land, sometimes you can just post if your bread's good and you're happy with it and you're comfortable sharing it. Sometimes you can post on Marketplace and, I don't know, make $5 or $10 a loaf. So what I do during the bulk proofing process is I do my best to sort of push the dough down into the bulk proofing container as level as I can get it. Right? So I'm just going to do this, but it's never going to sit totally level. It just doesn't, right? Let me get my hands nice and clean here. So the next thing that I do is I actually use a marker to mark the height on my dough so that I know where it started. So then as the day goes on, usually after 3 hours, I start checking once every half hour or so. I'll be able to see how much my dough has grown. But a lot of confusion comes from like what is double. So sometimes I'll show the pre-shaping, shaping, and baking phase during one of my lives or my videos, and people are like, I'm looking at that container and that's not double. So I'll show you what I mean. So let me just do this. So what I do is I take my marker and I mark, we don't have to be super specific, but I mark my dough where it actually is. And I also tell myself if there's voids. I tell myself when the dough isn't touching the sides of the thing or whatever, right? So here we go. So I'm just going to show you this, and I'm going to show you what I mean when we're always estimating with double, right? We always say, oh, 100%, 75%, but the reality is it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be the same all the time. But if you look, right, what I've done is I've marked everywhere the dough is touching. So see on the side here, it's much lower, right? I've also marked where the dough is not touching. So you can see here I've got like an air pocket. It's like a void there. Well, now when I come in, so later today when I take this out to pre-shape it, it's going to be only like, say, 1.5 fingers above the very top of this red line, right? And if somebody were looking at my line and saw that it was only slightly up there, they would say, oh, that's not doubled, right? But the reality is that the dough is going to end up level and full. And over here, if the dough's up here, right, then it's actually like tripled or quadrupled there, right? So that's why we say you don't have to do bulk proofing like this, but we made this video called Do This One Thing for Bulk Proofing Success. We say that if you use this method, it's going to help you to get like a really good idea of how your dough's doing, how it's growing, and this just makes it easy, right? So my dough will take between 4 and 5 hours to bulk proof. I've added some spelt to this one. Heavy wheat flours tend to bulk proof much, much faster than white flours. So I will, keep an eye on it. And that's another thing to keep in mind is that your dough is going to act differently every day. Like sourdough is just so heavily affected by the environment. If it's damp, if it's dry, if it's high pressure, if it's low pressure, if it's warmer in your house or colder in your house, if it's cold outside or warm outside, if you use a little bit more wheat, if you use a little bit less water, all of these things are going to affect how your dough is going to work, right? So people always say, how long should I bulk proof for? And the answer is the only way to know for sure is to watch it, right? Is to keep an eye on it. So the essential processes, I'm about to sourdough for beginners. How do you send stars? Oh, those are fun. I love those things. So I think when you go to comment, there's like a little, like it'll say like reply or comment or something like that. And there's like a little star there and it says star beside it. Like it's not an emoji. I don't know exactly how you do it, but like it's, yeah, I don't know. So come into the live and go to ask your question and like either underneath the live or when you go to do your comment, they pop up. And by the way, I'm only going to stay on a little bit longer here, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. So the essential processes, what we've done is we have gone out and said, what needs to happen to make good bread, right? There's a lot of information out there. And the cool thing is that a lot of that information that is out there is actually valid and can help you make great sourdough bread. But there's so much information out there that it's easy to get confused and it's easy to get things out of order. And it's a lot of techniques to master. So a really good example is cold proofing, right? Cold proofing can allow your dough to continue to ferment longer. It allows the gluten structures to get stronger. It increases the real sour flavor in your dough. It's a great process. But here's the thing. If you messed up during bulk proofing, cold proofing is only going to make whatever you did wrong worse. It's going to magnify the problem. Another example is a levain, right? We see people come in all the time. What's a levain? Well, a levain is where you take some starter out of your main starter and put it into a bowl and feed it to prepare yourself for your loaf of bread. The only time you would really need a levain is if you're trying to get a specific flavor in your starter. So the more flour your starter has, the less sour taste it has, right? There's two ways to affect the taste of your starter. One is to feed it more flour, and another is to use it past peak, right? So I always say we want to use our starter at or after peak, and the longer past peak, the more sour flavor you get. Creating a levain is actually important in certain types of bread making, but when you're a beginner at sourdough, it's not. So I always tell people, it's great, learn about it, right? But when you're just getting started, just follow these basic techniques. So in the description of this video, I've pasted like the new YouTube playlist. I pasted the Sourdough Essentials ebook. I've pasted the beginner bread recipe. And then there's just 3 ones there. There's one that's called timing that shows you how we recommend beginners get started. We recommend you just feed your starter before bed, get up early in the morning and mix so that you can watch through the day. So we're not saying you always need to do starter that way or sourdough that way. What we're saying is that when you're a beginner, try to plan your first mix and your first loaf on a day when you're going to be home or around enough to be able to watch your dough, because theoretically you should be able to bake your bread that same day and skip cold proofing. The pre-shaping video is important too, right? So sourdough is sticky. It's supposed to be sticky, right? But then there is too sticky. And too sticky means overproof, too much water. There's all kinds of reasons that could cause too sticky. Usually it's overproofed. But pre-shaping helps to manage the stickiness that should be there and can even help to make an overproof dough more manageable. So what's going to happen for me today is these are going to sit in a warm spot over beside my stove. That seems to be the warmest spot in my house, and I'm going to wait for them to double. And then once they double, I'm going to pre-shape them with no flour, no water, just my bench scraper in my hand, right? Get them into a nice ball, trap some good tension inside of them, right? What happens when you pre-shape is that first you start with this sort of sticky mess of dough, but as you pre-shape, you trap all kinds of air in there. And you end up creating tension. You also put like a dry spot on top of the dough that makes it more manageable. So you wait 20 or 30 minutes and then you do the final shape and a functional score, right? So a functional score allows steam to escape during the baking process, which is important. All of the other scores are aesthetic and pretty and fun, but if your dough is not proofed effectively, it's not going to hold a score properly anyway. So then we say bake it. So Tammy says, I put my starter in today and I put in like half a cup of flour instead of water. I quickly took out almost all of it. So I added water, then flour, then salt. Seems okay. Do you think it will turn out? Tammy, do you mean in your bread mix? If it seems okay, keep going, right? Like, you know what your mistake was today. You did your best to fix it. And this happens with sourdough. Like this morning, my stepdaughter, Abigail, mixed this batch. And it was her first time ever doing it where I didn't touch. And oh my gosh, I was like holding my hands back, like not because I didn't think she was doing it, but just because she's 9 and I want her to feel confident. So she was pouring some stuff in and we ended up with 207 grams of starter and 703 grams of water, and only 18 grams of salt and about 1,010 grams of flour, right? The recipe's kind of off, a little wonky, right? But what you said, it seems fine. This seems fine. I'm obviously going to watch it during the bulk proofing process. That's where you get the biggest story about what's happening with your bread. So Tammy, I would say for you, just keep going and do your best and see how it turns out, and then just fix that mistake on your next loaf. So I'm not going to stay on much longer. We're going to go do some fun Sunday stuff today and enjoy our day. It's been a busy weekend, and I'm going to let this bulk proof, pre-shape, shape it, score it. I'll probably bake one, and then I will stick the other one in my like silicone Banneton and cold proof it overnight. and probably bake this loaf late tomorrow or Tuesday morning as we need the bread. Um, and I think that's it. I think that's good. So happy sourdough making. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for all the questions. I'm glad you're here. All the questions you guys ask end up being what we base the tutorials on. 9 times out of 10, the questions are all pretty similar or along the same vein. But when you guys keep talking to us, we are like, the admin team and I are kind of always like paying attention and finding, oh, this is a trend. Like people are struggling with this, right? So just slowly over time, we've addressed this is what you should do with your starter lid. This is what tools you could use. These are myths. These are truths. Try this, try that, right? So definitely go check out all the tutorials on the page. Definitely check out the description today. I think you guys are going to like how the YouTube channel is updated and organized. And if you can think of anything I should add, then definitely let me know. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye for now.